Dalai refers to the ocean, and Lama is a spiritual leader in terms of the tradition, so he's the oceanic spiritual leader.
The Dalai Lama is the spiritual and temporal leader of the Tibetan people. He is a holy man. He is a person eligible for nirvana, for an escape from the cycle of birth and rebirth. And he, out of infinite compassion, is, as bodhisattvas are, back in the world to try to help the rest of us along.
It is a tenet of Tibetan Buddhism that enlightened beings are not limited to the form of the Buddha with which we are familiar. A Buddha is able to appear in whatever form, animate or inanimate, that is appropriate to benefit the suffering world. Tibetans believe that not only that enlightened beings take rebirth in the world out of their infinite compassion, but that such beings can be identified at birth.
Tibetan Buddhism belongs to the Mahayana school, but what is distinctive about it is that Tibetans believe that in their midst, not a human being has died, not a bodhisattva in the cosmos, but in their midst, there are living people who have attained Buddhahood, if you will. Hence, the status of the Dalai Lama is not just of a holy man, not just as a person who ruled Tibet. Tibet used to be a warlike monarchical society. By the 13th century, the rule of lamas had been established, and Tibet was transformed from a decentralized feudal warlike society into a unified, more or less culturally homogeneous Buddhist society based on nonviolence that essentially renounced violence. The Buddhists believe that successive Dalai Lamas are incarnations of bodhisattvas, Buddhas here on earth. The distinctive aspect of Tibetan Buddhism is the notion that one doesn't seek Buddha out there, one seeks Buddha here, because living, breathing teachers, such as the Dalai Lama, incorporate the sense of Buddha. Good.
So the question is, how do we get on this path to enlightenment, to Buddhahood? An illustration of these ideas is found in the Tibetan Buddhist diagram of the wheel of cyclic existence, sometimes called the wheel of life. It is a traditional painting placed near the door of Buddhist temples so that one will see it before one enters and have an incentive to practice. It shows a variety of sufferings and their underlying causes, as well as a way out of suffering. The symbol of the wheel suggests our being stuck in continuous cycling through birth and death in the 6 realms. However, note that there is enlightened existence outside of cyclic existence, and that is symbolized by the image of the Buddha outside the wheel pointing to the moon. The moon symbolizes liberation, the possibility of freedom from suffering and the round of rebirth. The Buddha's hand is pointing to it, and that symbolizes the teachings that will lead one out of suffering to liberation.
The Dalai Lama is a person who has moved along on that cycle to the point where he is eligible, if you will, for escape. He can leave the world of suffering. He is an enlightened being, but he has, in a sense, chosen not to move on, because his compassion for the suffering of the world brings him back. My image of a bodhisattva has always been somebody moving along a field towards a fence, and on the other side of the fence is bliss. The bodhisattva gets up to the fence and throws a leg over, and before throwing the other leg over, looks back and just sees suffering humanity moving along at a very slow pace. And he goes, I got to go back there. I got to help them along. So relinquishes out of compassion for others, in a sense, his reward, and goes back into the world to help the rest of us along. That's what a bodhisattva is. That's my image of it.
So if you ask who the bodhisattva is a man. He's a man who, in that sense, is just like the rest of us. But in terms of Buddhist theory, he is also a reincarnate presence of this figure known as the bodhisattva.
It is, to my mind anyway, difficult to conceive of Buddhism as a religion in the traditional sense. Some people say that Buddhism is not a religion, it's a way of life. That's not correct either. But there is no monotheistic, if you will, sky god that the Buddhists have in mind when they speak of divinity. The Buddha himself was an Indian prince who, as a human being, achieved enlightenment because he was torn by a warlike, unjust society in which he lived, but he made it a point to say that in no account was he a god or should he be treated as such.
The Buddha has entered nirvana. And of course, there is a huge controversy across the Buddhist schools as to what exactly that means. And so it's not that the Buddha created the world or that the Buddha can wipe away bad karma. The Buddha does not punish sinners or reward the virtuous, but one acquires merit in relation to the Buddha as the object of veneration. And that's the standard Buddhist tenet.
Buddhism believes that every sentient being can ultimately escape the cycle of birth and rebirth, which is associated with the condition of suffering. Some people find this a very pessimistic point of view, but it begins with this idea that unenlightened beings are caught in a world of suffering. And it doesn't mean that every moment you are conscious of being in pain or something like that. It's like being on a cart with wooden wheels, not comfortable, and you're on a rutted road, not comfortable, and one of the wheels is out of round. So you're being jostled all the time. You never quite get rested. For every good thing that happens, every pause, in a couple of moments, something else is going to happen to jar you and bump you. So that's what existence is like. It's not a smooth ride for anybody. All the things that you desire in life that you think would make the ride smooth are, in a sense, illusions. Because go after them, try it. Try to get the good job, the big bucks, the beautiful spouse, the children, everything that you associate with the good life, and it will not ultimately bring you happiness. Those things that we seek and crave are not bringing us happiness, and that's part of the insight of Buddhism, because life is this movement where things are up and down and everything is impermanent, things are in motion, and finding peace and internal peace takes a great deal of effort. So Buddhism's insight really is that all existence is suffering, and Buddhism tries to set out a pathway to help you cope with all that and to deal with all that and move you forward in life in such a way that you are not inhibiting progress. I mean, there is sort of an evolutionary notion in Buddhism that you can make progress, and in another lifetime you may be in a place where the suffering diminishes as you acquire a greater and greater movement into awareness and enlightenment.
I think there are two ways of looking at the study of Buddhism, and both models have existed in the United States. One is to say there's something called Buddhist studies, which is a discipline, some would say. And for that discipline, one has as the lingua franca Sanskrit and perhaps Pali. And the way the field divided was that people would either do South and Southeast Asian Buddhism and know Sanskrit and Pali, or East Asian Buddhism and do Chinese and Japanese. Tibetan was just kind of in that blank space in between that no one knew quite what to do with. And the Tibetan language was really used up until the 20th century primarily as a way to read Indian texts. That is, so many of the Mahayana sutras and commentaries had been translated into Tibetan and then lost in the original Sanskrit, that the only form of the text that existed was the Tibetan translation. And so people would learn Tibetan simply to be able to reconstruct, in a certain sense, Indian Buddhism.
To the degree you know anything about Tibetan Buddhism, one thing you know is that Tantric Buddhism, this late development in Buddhism, is one of the areas that was really explored in Tibet. And there's an enormous amount of writing. Tantra is about a lot of things, but one of the things Tantra is about is using human sexuality in very particular religious ways. There's enormously interesting material there about the nature of male and female, how they're different, what is sexual difference, how do they interact, what are their implications for our experience. and at the same time, really interesting notions about how all of us are in some ways both male and female, and we have these elements inside of us. Again, that calls into question what our sexual identity has to do with some of these larger, maybe more generalized forces that can be sometimes labeled male and female, and what do those labels mean exactly?
So it's a very complex religion and has different kinds of forms, and it's adapted to different kinds of cultures, which is, it's in America, and it is adapted to American culture. We have a whole movement of engaged Buddhists. You know, the American religious tradition, because of the Christian and Jewish emphasis, very much interested in social action. Social action hasn't been a primary thrust in Buddhism, but when it has come into the American culture, it gets adapted, and there's a whole movement right now in American Buddhism called engaged Buddhism, and it's another form of Buddhism. It takes social action issues very seriously. It's been involved in the environmental movement and those kinds of things. But one of the reasons Buddhism became a world religion in this Mahayana tradition is because of its ability to move into different kinds of societies and cultures and adapt to those cultures. Even in Tibet, Buddhism that came into Tibet adapted to it and picked up on a lot of the Bo religion, which had been the indigenous religion prior to Buddhism. And one of the reasons in Buddhist art there is so much attention to these devilish characters in the artwork, these sort of demonic figures, is that those trace back to the pre-Buddhist tradition that got incorporated into the Buddhism that came into Tibet.
I think that it's appropriate for people to examine their ideas of what happiness is and what they think they're going after. The beginning of Aristotle's Ethics says everyone says they want happiness, but then everyone disagrees about how to get it and what happiness is. And I think that's the appropriate dialogue to be having. Is happiness about material success? Is happiness about spiritual values? Is it about developing personal qualities or obtaining external goods? Is it about becoming part of community, or is it something you can achieve on your own? I think there are lots of questions around the nature of meaning in life and happiness that are very appropriate. You know, everybody's inclined to get one idea and then have blinders on about the alternatives. So I think it's good to expose people to as many as possible. It's what a liberal arts education used to mean.
You have to be critical, even doubt what I say, but you really will be able to understand. And not only will you be able to, but you better understand. Because if you don't understand yourself and your world, you will not be happy. And Americans are not frightened by not being happy that much, because, no, Americans are not, because Americans know that all they have to do to get out of unhappiness is die. And then once you're dead, it's all over, and Richard Dawkins takes over, or your genes go somewhere, and you won't have another life. So therefore, even though I'm unhappy, it won't last that long,
You acquire happiness by following a pathway. And that's what all religions offer. And that's what philosophies offer, unless the philosophy isn't offering happiness. But the pathway is to greater awareness, greater consciousness, a greater sense of what makes life meaningful. And in Buddhism, and I think you find this in Christianity and other religious traditions as well, the movement towards happiness is ultimately a movement out of yourself into the world of others, where you recognize yourself in others, and others come ultimately to recognize themselves in you. And it's a true equanimity of persons and spirits and beings at that point. And I think that's where happiness is. If there's too much ego and too much self-centeredness in your existence, I think that the Buddhist insight is that that's going to prevent you from acquiring happiness. And again, you know, what is happiness? Well, what is happiness? I'm not sure we know what that looks like. It's not necessarily a pleasure state that you're in, but it may be this kind of equipoise attitude that you have, seeing that the world is you and you are the world of other beings. So there's something like that going on with it. And I'm a Christian by background, and I see something like that in Christianity. I think the Christian movement is calling people out of themselves into concern for others, and it takes a focus along a social justice route. You know, when you know Jesus says, as you have done it to the least of these, you have done it to me. And there's an identification with, in a sense, all sentient beings with the Christ. And that's the kind of Christianity that inspires me. And I think Buddhism has an insight like that as well.
A mandala is a schematic diagram of a Buddhist palace. That is, in Tantric Buddhism, Buddhas occupy a magnificent palace, and the mandala is an aerial view of that palace.
The monks, after weeks sometimes of very meticulous, it's a meditation to do the mandala itself, and at the very end, they get down with dustpan and broom and sweep it up and put it into vessels, and then the tradition usually is to pour that into the water, into a body of moving water. And the mandala release ceremony does is it reminds us that everything is transient. There is nothing permanent. And we need to make our peace. Making peace with that is a wonderful sense of relief. It's a joyous occasion, not something that's to be bemoaned.
So the Buddha established an order of nuns after he'd established an order of monks. According to the traditional story, he did this after having to be persuaded by one of his disciples that this was a good idea. That is, he did so rather grudgingly, stating that he was doing this, but by doing that, the duration of his teaching in the world would be diminished. And after a war occurred in which the monastic community was decimated, it was important to reestablish the order of monks. So the way you do that is you bring over some ordained monks from another country, and they ordain the new monks. You have to have a certain number of ordained monks to ordain a new monk. They reestablished the order of monks. They did not reestablish the order of nuns in Sri Lanka. And so in Theravada Buddhism, there have not been nuns for over a millennium. In Tibet, they never established an order of fully ordained nuns. So we have to make the distinction between what we call a full nun and a novice. A novice holds very few vows. A full nun holds a large number, over 300 vows. And that order was never established in Tibet. So the women that we call nuns in Tibetan Buddhism are novices. They're not fully ordained as monks would be.
However, there is a strong movement to reestablish full ordination for women. Now, again, raising the question of feminism, is that a feminist movement, and where is it coming from? Is it a Western thing or not? That's a big question that we're in the process of debating at this moment. But it does have to do with gender politics. How do you reestablish this ordination? And this has grown. There now is a major international women's movement called Sakyadhita. And what women have started to do is take full ordination from these Chinese nuns' orders. In order to take ordination, you need to take ordination from someone else who has themselves received it in the proper ordination ritual in a lineage that goes all the way back to the Buddha. So the problem is, where do you find, if you live in a place like Sri Lanka or Tibet, there aren't any fully ordained nuns there. And so therefore you need to find someone. People have been going to Taiwan and taking these vows and then going back to their own countries and trying to establish and then themselves start giving these ordination rituals in their own countries. It's actually an extremely exciting movement to see how this is playing out. It's coming into a lot of obstacles by conservative male members of the Sangha who don't want to see this happening. On the other hand, there are enlightened male monks who are happy to see this and are giving it support. And in Sri Lanka in particular, it's really starting to take off, which is actually quite surprising because the Sangha there is very conservative, as it is in other parts of Asia. Well, what happens in ordination is you accept a whole bunch of disciplinary vows. You also have your head shaven, you are given a robe and a bowl and other basic accoutrements to be a monk or a nun. So the ordination rituals for monks and nuns are very similar, except that nuns have more vows to take than monks do. This is a whole big topic in the sort of feminist issues with Buddhism. Literally every nunnery that I visited had a number of sisters who were in prison at the time. So they all knew who was in prison. And they were in prison because they've been participating in demonstrations in the center of Lhasa. And both monks and nuns have been doing this. So I don't know, there's not a real gender difference with a few exceptions. One is that nuns have been participating quite bravely in these demonstrations and sometimes doing it on their own. And they always know that they're going to be arrested and very likely that they're going to be tortured, actually, in prison. But the same is true for monks, but it's exceptional that women would do it as well. And that's one of the reasons why I said that the whole reputation of nuns is changing, because the people know that nuns are doing this and they respect them for it, even though they also are heartbroken by it. And certainly in the monastic world, women are not highly regarded. All of this is complicated because it's all changing as we speak. But in general, the situation has been that nuns have a much lesser status than monks do in Tibet.
The main term for woman in Tibetan is gemen, which means one of lower birth. And so it's considered better to be reborn as a male than a female. And there are actually Buddhist prayers, may I be reborn as a male in my next lifetime. This is, from one perspective, just a reflection of the cultural reality, that men have many more opportunities for study and practice than women have had traditionally.
This is a very hard thing to do, to get social acceptance for that, but actually it's starting to take root in Sri Lanka at the moment. It's quite exceptional. The Tibetans are working on it as we speak, and it hasn't happened yet.
Here's Tibet, right, between China, which is sort of part of, and Nepal, India, Bhutan, etc. Okay, fine. Topographically, however, it's the top of the world. Great big plateau.
Now, here's a geology lesson. I'll keep this brief, but it's important. India, the continental block embedded in what's called a lithospheric plate, is moving north at fingernail speed, about 4 centimeters a year, at about that angle of the black arrow. And as a result of it, it's hitting the Eurasian continental block. And push is coming to shove, you're raising Tibet. The reason it's interesting to us is that lots of things happen when you jam two continents together. And this started 50 million years ago, maybe 30. There's actually a bit of debate that's popped up. And this is for geologists ongoing and modern, although for other people 30 million years is a fair bit of time. The main event everyone thinks about is the collision, the mountains. But actually, the Indian plate has sides to it. And at those sides, you get what's called strikes of faulting, lateral faulting, of the kind you see in the San Andreas Fault. And then what gets particularly amazing in the northeastern corner is, and that's what we're calling a corner of the plate boundaries, is you get a combination of all these directions and forces that create a very complex geology.
Tibet is a particularly important place environmentally just because of its elevation. It essentially drives the Asian monsoon, which matters to a lot of people, and it's pretty simple. In the summer, heats it up. It's already high. Hot air rises, up it goes. Cool air from the Indian Ocean comes to take its place, comes across India, dropping the rain and the monsoon. Very little of the moisture makes it over into Tibet, but Tibet is the engine. So it's a high elevation heat source. Okay. Now when you discuss culture in Tibet, the main thing is Buddhism and religion. This is Potala Palace that you may be familiar with, the home for Dalai Lamas for the last 1,300 years or so, at least until 1959. Here's the Panchen Lama, the former Panchen Lama, who died in, I think, 89, and had some position, some stature in the Chinese government. And you still see pictures of him. You do not see pictures of the Dalai Lama anywhere. But it's not there.
Most tourists are allowed into Lhasa, but you're not allowed to travel in the countryside. There are monasteries and monks and signs of religion everywhere, ranging from quite large monasteries to small stupas and other signs in the architecture, and even hand-built stone structures way in the southeast.
Every time you come to a pass, you find that there are always prayer flags and often large piles of mani stones as well. So again, this spirituality is actually something that you just see everywhere that you go in Tibet.
And this is where all the prayer beads, called the mala beads, are hung. If you come in and you don't have your own prayer bead rosary, you can take one and pray and put it back. There are 108 beads in each one of these. And this is the yak butter candles they burn in the temples. If you want to donate some money, you can scoop a little yak butter and add it to the candle, and that's your donation.
The Tibetans take their religion very seriously, and here are people who have come, not necessarily pilgrims, who come to Lhasa like an inchworm. Prostrate, stand up. Prostrate, stand up. Right? So one body length at a time, from wherever they come from, far away in Tibet and other lands.
So here's a man who is doing his pilgrimage. This man told me he was on the road for 2 years from his hometown prostrating to come to circumvent the temple. And sometimes on the highways you see people prostrating, and they are going to India to visit the Dalai Lama, and some of them have been they give themselves 5 years to get there, that kind of thing. And the little woman is behind them pulling a little cart with all the worldly possessions.
You see this dark area here? That's where millions of hands and palms have rubbed the pavement smooth from just lying down prostrate and standing up.
Now she is holding a prayer wheel. I don't know, you must have heard about prayer wheels. They turn them, and inside is a big scroll of prayers. So the prayers automatically happen as you turn this.
And pointing out that these are places, you don't escape the world, you go there to become enlightened, to experience the world. And the point of a pilgrimage there is the journey, not the destination. And it's kind of ironic that some have said that the reason that Pemmico is called a paradise, these are monks talking, it was a paradise because the privation and the suffering was so great that it led to enlightenment. And of course, people that weren't quite aware of what they were talking about thought, oh really, it's a paradise? Let's go there. And when they arrived, discovered the snakes and the stinging nettles and the perpetual rain.
In the popular imagination, Tibet, which has been regarded by so many as a remote and exotic preserve of a wisdom that the rest of the world had lost, was destroyed, just at the moment when the world seemed most in need of its carefully guarded secrets. Today, Tibet continues to function as Shangri-La precisely because it does not exist. Or to put it more precisely, the fantasy that was Tibet continues to function as Shangri-La, not merely because it never did exist, but because it is imagined to have been destroyed in 1959. For in order for Shangri-La to exist, it must be inaccessible. Just at the point when Tibet was ready to emerge from over a century of isolation, at least as that term is understood in the history of Western diplomacy, it was invaded by China, and the human embodiment of Tibet, the Dalai Lama, was forced into exile. Old Tibet ceased to exist at that moment. It is the fantasy of old Tibet that continues to serve as Shangri-La, a society that seems to have existed just a half century ago within the memory of many. The ravages brought about by China's policies in Tibet policies that have resulted not only in the destruction of monasteries, temples, and texts and works of art, but in the death of hundreds of thousands of Tibetans, would seem to be enough to sustain the clear contrast with life in Tibet prior to the invasion. In a recent documentary about the search for Shangri-La, the Dalai Lama was asked about the location of Shambhala. He said, quote, "It's quite clear that Shambhala does not exist on this planet. So the conclusion is that it must be somewhere in space. I think that is possible, but I'm not much interested in these things. My main concern is our own beautiful planet, full of troubles."
The Dalai Lama has been acknowledged over the centuries as a secular, a leader of the secular state of Tibet. It's sort of a theocracy, if you want to think about it that way.
The Tibetan system of succession politically, in the case of the Dalai Lama, is one that is unique in the world. That is, unlike a king passing on the throne to his son, or having an election in which candidates come forward and there's an inauguration every 4 years. The Tibetans have this system of incarnation. Scholars believe that this was really set up as a way to pass power and pass charisma in a certain sense from one generation to the next without the biological connection. That is, we have a tradition in which the people holding the power are celibate monks. So they're not going to have children to whom they can pass on the throne. So it began that often power would be passed from a monk who was an uncle to his nephew. But then the incarnation system became set up and became pervasive in Tibet.
So the present Dalai Lama was found, and there were certain tests given to him. One of the ones I recall is that he was put into a room at the main palace in Lhasa, and he went right over to and found the 13th Dalai Lama's false teeth, which had been lost, and nobody knew where they were, but they were in some kind of container, and he went right over and found them. But there were different kinds of tests that are given to authenticate whether in fact this young person is the reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lama. And it's part of the lore that surrounds the present Dalai Lama, that he had these remarkable experiences. And he's able to talk about those things too. I mean, he will converse about deja vu experiences that he has had that seem rather unusual and are related to these previous lifetimes. So this is very difficult for Westerners because this isn't part of our religious or psychological world. I mean, we've all had experiences of deja vu, so we can make some kind of connection there, but to give it greater significance is not something we typically do. But those kinds of experiences mean something in the Buddhist world.
But we have to now think about what will happen when the Dalai Lama passes away, whenever that is. At that point, then, a new child has to be discovered. The Chinese declaration that they will be the ones who will identify all incarnate lamas is really in anticipation of that event. And they will certainly claim to find the next Dalai Lama in Tibet, in Chinese-controlled Tibet. Now, according to Buddhist doctrine, the Dalai Lama has complete control over where he's reborn. And he can decide what country, who the parents will be, all down to the most specific elements of this decision are his. And he's already declared that he will be reborn in exile. So whenever he passes away, sometime 3 years after that, because the child has to be born and has to be able to, usually they're chosen at about the age of 2 or 3 at the youngest. They'll find a child. The Chinese will find one. The Tibetans will find one in exile. So we'll have competing Dalai Lamas, each of whom will be 2 years old.
Just respect the Dalai Lama as a religious leader. But actually, so many his supporters just want to separate Tibet from China. We do not support that. We think Tibet is a part of China, was and is and always be.
They feel that they're realizing their goal. They're able to realize their goals by making an enemy out of the Dalai Lama themselves, by trying to claim he's a bad person when everyone else likes him on the planet. And I had no idea that Tibet would rise up the way it did. And I'm very distressed, of course, at the outcome, which is that thousands of Tibetan monks will lose their, some of them lives, and some of them for liberty, and some of them, and even those who are most mildly handled, will not be able to be monks anymore and at all, and they'll be sent back to villages where they will have no livelihood, and they'll be persecuted by the police there and so on, Chinese police there. So he was very distressed. We were all very distressed that they felt compelled to stand up and resist the Chinese.
Religion is one thing, but political thing is the other thing. He can say, okay, I'm the god of this religion, but the requirement on political is not true. Why he asked Tibet independent? He just want to govern the people of that area. His excuse is these people worship me, want me govern them, but that's not true. You can imagine if it happened in U.S. When people said, all the people in the city worship me, so our city should be independent out of U.S. government. What do you think?
The Dalai Lama has, because of the conflict with China, has offered to relinquish temporal leadership that is not so critical to him.
Tibet is, I think, a kind of, it's a cause that is easy to support by people of goodwill. That is, it is a case of a country that had no standing army of any consequence, that was invaded by a larger force, that had most of its culture physically destroyed over the course of 20 years. And the Tibetans were harmless in all of this. They were simply invaded. Now the Dalai Lama, who was of course a figure of great charisma and great fame in the West, was able to escape in 1959. And over those past almost 50 years now, he's kept this story alive through his teachings and through his lectures across the United States.
He's the only one who's also a political leader, even though it's a people under occupation and in exile, who insists that that's the only approach, even in response to violence and in response to injury. Like a living Gandhi,
Yeah.
but a Gandhi on a worldwide stage, not just a Gandhi within a particular nation stage. You know, he has a particular national problem, but it's a worldwide stage. But he is trying to promote what he called the common human religion of kindness and the ethic of nonviolence and of dialogue to resolve conflict.
And Tibetan Buddhism as a tradition in and of itself, so to speak, was not really the object of that much study by scholars. They were travelers and mountaineers and people who had a sort of amateur interest, but the real professional interest in Tibetan Buddhism really did not begin until after the Tibetans came out in '59. That is, there's a very direct historical relationship between the Tibetans coming out, so many Tibetan texts coming at that time, those texts being published for the first time outside of Tibet, appearing in the libraries of the great American universities, and then people like Jeffrey Hopkins beginning PhD programs where people focus on Tibetan Buddhism, not as an adjunct to East Asian or South Asian Buddhism, but as something done in and of itself. So the stock of Tibetan Buddhist studies has risen considerably over the past 30 years.
It's a different cultural moment. In the 50s and 60s, Zen was the new exotic flavor. And Alan Watts and D.T. Suzuki and the Beats were discovering this, and it was brand new, and all the excitement of something really different was attached to Zen. And now I think the Tibetans are the flavor of the month, and that they are much more seen as what's happening. You know, and the Dalai Lama is a very visible and charismatic figure, and I don't think there's any single figure in Zen right now that commands that kind of attention.
I think if he had stayed in Tibet, he would have been killed. The night that he left, his palace was bombed. So.
Being killed, obviously you can't lead your people, so like in some like sense, by like being in exile, he could better control and like lead his people. Even though it was more difficult, at least he was still able to, you know?
Yeah.
So in some sense it's selfish, but almost it wasn't, because he was kind of like still saving their leader. Buddhism kind of played a major role in all his decision making. He based every decision throughout his life on spirituality. And for better or for worse, like it shaped his life and the way he led his country.
Yeah, absolutely. That his job was to alleviate suffering. That life is suffering, and his job as a Buddhist monk is to alleviate suffering. And he starts from that core, and then he makes his decisions from that point.
The way I see it, he was actually doing a better service to the Tibetan people when he was in exile with them. Because the Chinese had taken over, there was no way he could have helped his situation in Tibet from the inside. So instead, he was helping the refugees and getting them a great education.
So it was hard for the people in Tibet because they lost their primary leader, but at the same point he was losing power every day with the Chinese while he was in Tibet. But then when he went to exile, he was helping thousands in exile, and it really turned into a global issue because he got help from other countries.
And the fact that he was in exile, I think, made him more motivated to help his people. I don't think it would have been the same if the situation with Tibet and China wasn't that.
He was not able to help his people at all when he was in Tibet. He was almost held completely hostage by the Chinese. He was forced to do whatever they wanted, and he was censored basically from speaking out. By going out of Tibet, he was able to have like free speech and speak out and get people around the world to know about his plight. So like he left Tibet to help his people. I don't really think abandonment, it's fair to say that he abandoned them. He did leave with the purpose of helping them.
It is because I believe that the most important thing for humankind is its own creativity. I further believe that in order to be able to exercise this creativity, people need to be free. I have freedom in exile.
What's this thought? Fire! Coming up! No, I'm actually tight on this, so if I'm bumping down, I want to bump down. Sight along the top
This is the second time that I've found a magazine, a free magazine, in this case in the library, seen an ad, and I'd seen His Holiness Dalai Lama said he's retiring soon, and it said he'd be here for 6 days, and I thought I should come.
was dwelling in Rajagriha on Vulture's Mountain, together in one method with a great assembly of monastics and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time the Blessed One was absorbed in the concentration of the countless aspects of phenomena called profound illumination. At that time also superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, was looking perfectly at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom perfect. The superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, and that entire assembly of disciples, as well as the worldly beings, gods, humans, demigods, and spirits, were delighted and highly praised what had been spoken by the Blessed One.
Thank you.
Indeed, I'm very, very happy here lecture on Lamrim Chamo, the late Geshe Wangyal's center, I think very faithfully carry the late Wangyala's spirit. So with that, they asked me the teaching of Lamrim Chamo, and they also translate Lamrim Chamo. Although the Lamrim Chamo book, Lamrim book, I think available, but I brought with me is this my own personal sort of Lamrim Chamo, because this text, 17th March 1959, when I left Nobulinga that night, this book I brought with me. Perhaps some may be new, so I want to mention briefly about my basic positive views or commitment. I am just one human being among 6 million human beings. I am just one of them. I think beside our prayers and these things, in reality, we all 6 billion human beings share one planet. We all survive under one sun. Each of us' future entirely depends on the rest of the humanity, rest of the world. So there we need the sense of sort of concern of well-being of rest of the people, rest of the sentient being, or rest of the world. So that my number one commitment, make clear that we need more wider view and sense of global responsibility. So I feel the Buddhist teaching not take as a religion, but simply some ideas to think entire sentient being is useful. So the Buddhist message of infinite altruism is something very relevant. Not talking about next life or not talking about Buddhahood, but simply in order to be happier person, something sensible person, something useful person on this planet. I think the message or teaching of infinite altruism is something very useful. To non-believer who have no interest about religion, okay, listen some of these ideas. If you feel something useful, then take it. If you feel nonsense, then forget. No problem. Then second, my commitment is the promotion of religious harmony. Some innocent, genuine, faithful people sometimes suffer. So therefore, the effort, promotion of religious sort of harmony with mutual respect, mutual understanding is very, very essential. And particularly Muslim brothers and sisters, I think very, very important. Since the September 11th event, sometimes some negative sort of impression. So that's totally wrong. Good. Of course, from Buddhist viewpoint, I think in past history, I think many Indian Buddhists used to suffer a lot under Muslim hand. Past is past. No use is it to think these lines and then keep hatred. Absolutely foolish. Past is past. Some scholar described Buddhism is not religion, but science of mind. I think it's quite true, because the Buddhism, like any other non-theistic religion, the basic concept is law of causality, cause and effect, all of that. So the thing which we are very much concerned, that is suffering, pain. So the pains, the pleasure, these things are feeling. In order to reduce suffering, pains, worry, sadness, fear, they ultimately depend on our mental attitude. I think conviction, firm conviction, that is something important. Now, firm conviction must come out of analytical meditation. So therefore, the Buddhist way of approach is utilize human intelligence maximum way, through that way transform our mind. But generally, I think one event, one thing, if you look from one angle, you cannot see the full picture. One event, in order to know that, you have to look from various different angles. Even if it's a physical thing, from one dimension, you cannot see the fuller picture. The 3 dimensions, or 4 dimensions, or 6 dimensions. Then you get more clearer picture about the reality. So in order to know the reality, you have to look from various angles and from various dimensions. Otherwise, from one dimension appears something, but there are always possible gap in that appearance and the reality. Like that. So therefore, the investigation is very, very essential. So through investigation, the gap, appearance and reality can reduce. Only through investigation. Some of my Christian friends, practicing certain techniques or methods about compassion, about tolerance, or contentment in these fields. They use some Buddhist technique without changing religion. So that's a healthy way. That's very good. Philosophical side, there's big differences. But the practical level, the same. A practice of love, kindness, and with that, forgiveness, tolerance, and also self-discipline and contentment all these same practice and faith. But all these common practice, sincerely practice, and dedicate well-being of other. That's the purpose. And as a result, you yourself feel fulfilled of one's own purpose of our life. Just the luxurious sort of way of life, and spend a lot of money, and meanwhile, the same planet, some people facing difficulties or even starvations. Isn't it? So, they're helping other, serving other. It's the, I think, real meaning of life. After all, God created as a social animal. So there must be some meaning. So therefore, as a social animal, the very basis of sort of survival of the community or the social animal, affection. Taking care each other, or taking sense of concern and helping each other. Buddhist teaching, emphasis, no independent soul or independent self. I think that is demarcation, Buddhism and non-Buddhism. All rest of the non-Buddhist tradition, within non-Buddhist tradition, the theistic, non-theistic, but all accepted soul theory, something independent self, which owned this body and mind. Then, non-theistic religions, including Buddhism, now law of causality. So no certain sort of creator causes condition. Actually, causes are the creator of the result. So that causes also result of previous sort of causes. So through that way, now as far as Buddhism is concerned, logically, a cause effect, that because of the logic, because of the use, then if there is beginning without cause and difficult, so every event must be because of its own causes. So, like medicine, each different illness, we cannot say this medicine is best. We cannot say. We have to judge on best or not best according to illness. So similarly, according individual mental disposition, for this person, Christianity is best. To this person, Islam is best. For this person, Buddhism is best. So okay, so each case, there are one truth, one religion is their suitable, most effective religion. Now in terms of 3-person or 2-person, one Buddhist, one Christian, then already several truths, several religions already there. So in this whole, Buddhist there, Christian must be there, some Islamic way, practitioner must be there, some Jews. So already it's reality, several truths, several religion there. So in terms of society, several truths, several religion. I think that is a fact. So understand that. Then, now I think generally the pluralism, idea of pluralism of religion, now already because of increasing. So that's a healthy side. So I think possible. Still we need more effort in order to carry these sort of practice. Whether we accept religion or not, up to individual. In order to become a good human being, sensible human being, not necessarily become a religious person. A non-believer or wonderful non-believer people also there. But if you accept religion, then we should be serious and sincere. So that the teaching of one's own tradition then become part of our life. I think happier human society. And in such sort of a level, I think all tradition, same. Same potential, same aim. And after this life, then different views. At age 25, I become homeless person. So now 49 years, remaining as a homeless. But that situation actually brought to me much greater opportunity, meeting with different people. During these decades, a very good opportunity to learn from other spiritual traditions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, different Hinduism, and so on. So then I had a better opportunity to implement altruism. I always believe, I still in Botala, some people call golden cage. If I still remain there, perhaps my practice of altruism simply in form of prayer, become refugee, and much easier to communicate with people. This is real, I think, opportunity to implement altruism. So what way? Try to promote understanding or awareness the importance of warm-heartedness, not through religious way, but simply through our common experience, common sense, and then, most important, latest scientific findings. So warm-heartedness, basically give us better health, happier atmosphere, so that happier family, happier community. One occasion, one physician, I think this medical scientist, he mentioned those people who often say, I, me, mine, like that, then these people have greater danger or risk of heart attack. So, of course, naturally, it's a person who always think oneself, most important, always self-centered attitude. Of course, he or she should take the most care oneself. But because of that very way of thinking, actually, your body sort of function then not go properly. Think oneself, and even small problem appears unmanageable, unbearable. So, more worry and more suspicion, less trust towards other, as a result, loneliness, and through that way, even small problem, then feel hopeless. So therefore, I think the greater danger of heart attack, I think, come from that way. More altruistic attitude, open our inner door, open our mind, very easily to extend our hand. And through that way, you feel, I have plenty of friends. If some problems happen, I can rely on this person or that person, that person. If too much sort of self-centered attitude, then towards front, some suspicion. Towards this, again suspicion. Towards here, also suspicion. Back, even more suspicion. You can't see it. Isn't it? But warm-heartedness or altruistic attitude is laid open. So I think that's the reason from the helping point. More compassionate person, happier, healthier one. So then, as far as promotion of human value is concerned, promotion of religious harmony is concerned, everybody is have opportunity and potential to help that. So that I want to share. I'm just one simple person who are making some contribution. You all have, in some cases, I think, even greater potential to make contribution for a better world, happier world. Now, firstly, I want to make clear that loving kindness or compassion, affection, and religious faith essentially separate. Faith comes from religion. In our life, faith comes later, but affection comes from birth. Animals also appreciate affection or compassion, but they have no religion. So essentially it's two separate things. Then secondly, people often get the impression practice of compassion is something good for others, not necessarily good for oneself. That's also totally wrong. As I mentioned earlier, the peaceful mind brings by compassion. Everybody is in need, calm mind, happy life. In order to do that, money cannot bring peace of mind. Some my friend, I think a billionaire, very rich. But when we talk, when we spend more time, at the beginning, after some sort of nice exchange, nice words, then eventually the clear indication comes, the billionaire as an individual person, very unhappy person. We find that. So if money brings real mental peace or mental happiness, then these rich people must be very happy person. But not. And some poor people, materially poor, but mentally very happy. Their happiness comes from not external wealth, but some other factor. So therefore, we should not sort of neglect about our inner value. That's very important. That's mainly compassion. Now, out of practice of compassion, benefit to others, not for oneself necessarily. That I have my own sort of little experience. Sometimes I sort of drive through. As I sort of usually, I always sort of smile to anyone I consider another human being. I do not smile to dog. They cannot sort of appreciate. But human being, no need any introduction. But as long as it's one human body, one human nose, human eyes, human mouth, smile to them, they also respond usually. So I always do that. Sometimes when I smile to the person, then the person looks back, why? This person smiling on me. Oh, that kind of sort of attitude. So in that case, my expression of compassion brings more doubt or more suspicion in their mind. But to myself, smile, openness, that I feel happy. But there's sometimes, to other, sometimes bring more suspicion. Like that. Clear? So therefore, practice of compassion, the first benefit goes to oneself. Then eventually, others may receive some benefit. So, should know that. So therefore, now that I usually call the secular way. So, the affection or compassion itself, I consider secular ethics. That secular ethic through approach of secular way, using our common sense, common experience. I always consider first person who teach me value of affection is not my guru, not my teacher, but my mother. My mother, so kind, very, very warm-hearted person. Illiterate, uneducated, just woman of farmer, just like that. But very warm-hearted person. So I always feel today's certain amount of my compassion, this actually original seed come from my mother. So here, I think few thousand people here, all come from mother. All now today survived because of one's own mother's care or someone else's care. It's a fact. So we all have same potential to develop more warm-heartedness. No need, not necessarily, say, religious person, even person who very critical about religion. These people also need compassion. That's very important. So, that's the through reasoning, using our common sense, common experience, then you can bring firm conviction, the value of affection, a good heart. I think we completely neglected about our inner value. I think we got some kind of, I think wrong perception or wrong view. All our happiness depend on matters, and all sort of happiness must come from outside, and completely neglected about ultimate source of happiness within us, that we completely neglected. That is wrong. So, without contentment, you always feel something lacking, and too much competition, and too much ambition. All your hopes and ambition may not materialize. Then frustration, anger. Then also self-centered attitude, everything blame on other. So that creates more problem. All problem, external problems, never solved. Then depend on our own attitude. That we can change. So same environment, But change our attitude, you get more peaceful, more peace. Right? Now, for example, one attitude is the problem which there's a way to overcome that problem, then no need worry, make effort. If there's no way to overcome, then no use to worry. Just accept that. Much easier. So be realistic. Because of the unrealistic expectation also solves a problem. So be realistic. Something happened. If there's a way to overcome, make effort. There's Tibetan saying, 9 times failure, 9 times effort. Make effort. Then in any case, they completely fail, cannot avoid, cannot overcome, then okay, all right. I done my best. Now I cannot overcome that problem. Then I accept. For Buddhist, then blame on karma. Due to karma. Or those people who believe Creator, then in a way, blame to God. So ultimately, I think the loving kindness, warm-heartedness, this is the key thing. So, look at teacher. Now, since around 16-year-old, now till 73, still working on it. So you see, you also, have to think. You see, the study as well as practice takes many, many years. So should not feel because of that, discouraged or demoralized. Even one day, every day, learned 1 page is enough. Good. Then 100 days, 100 page. 1,000 days, 1,000 page. Okay. So even I think the construction of external thing is take time. The construction in our mind, it takes time. So not easy. But 100% sort of assurance is can change, can improve. That much from my own experience I can assure to you. If we make effort continuously, without losing interest, without losing determination, things can change. Things will improve. So then eventually our aim is genuine experience of infinite altruism and understanding of ultimate reality. Through that way, as a Buddhist, our final destination, Buddhahood. So now let us start from now to that final destination. Thank you.
right here.